Evan McLaughlin, and today we are analyzing Abraham Lincoln's August 26, 1863 letter to James C. Conkling. And for simplicity's sake, when I highlight something in blue or I'm discussing points that are made in blue, those are key points in Abraham Lincoln's thesis or his argument's development. Highlighting something in yellow has to, or references, points that show Lincoln's rhetorical use of prolepsis, which is a rhetorical device or logical device in public speaking and public writing, where you anticipate your opposition's argument, and as you anticipate it, you counteract it and you make statements that prove why it's wrong or incomplete. Points highlighted in red are Abraham Lincoln's use of vernacular, or the common everyday language which Lincoln used to convey his message simply and really on point to get his audience to agree with him. But before we begin analyzing this document at large, I'd like to take a minute just to talk about the context, because the context really informs Lincoln's argument, as well as why he has to use those two particular rhetorical elements to get the audience on his side. In the summer of 1863, the Union Army has had some major victories, most notably Vicksburg and Gettysburg. However, and as great as those military victories were, Northern sentiment in favor of the war was anything but solid, particularly because the war just continued dragging on, and family members were either dying and not coming back home at all, or they were coming back maimed, they were in prisoner of war camps, and public support for the war, it's waning because of just in the face of such unimaginable loss. On top of that, the New York draft riots symbolized and really manifested some incredible public discontent with the not only the Emancipation Proclamation, but certainly the Conscription Act, which forced citizens to join the military, and because of the Emancipation Proclamation, they were fighting, in effect, to free black slaves, which could eventually become their job competition. And this sort of discontent was not only spread in New York City, it really was throughout, in many communities throughout the North. On top of that, the Democratic Party is really capitalizing on this discontent, and they're running a war Democrat known as General George McClellan, one of the Army of the Potomac's former leaders, to run against Lincoln in the presidential election of 1864. And he's made it known that he is going to sue for peace. He is going to be entertaining any and all peace proposals from the South to try to end the war. The term Copperhead is used to describe an anti-war Democrat. And on the national picture, as unsteady as that looks, Lincoln's adopted home of Illinois doesn't look much better. In fact, in Lincoln's adopted home state, Democrats won 9 out of 14 state legislative seats. They controlled both the House of Representatives and the Senate in Illinois, and they also accepted 2 congressional revisions for their state constitution to bar black migration as well as voting in Illinois. So certainly, despite some pretty big victories in the summer of 1863, the path to presidential renomination in 1864 is anything but assured. And on top of that, really, the progress of the military progress of the Civil War is anything but sure. So now, more directly relating to this letter, on August 26th, Abraham Lincoln writes a response to James Conkling. James Conkling was a leading Republican figure who wanted Lincoln to come to a meeting of different Union elements, different Union Party elements, Republican Party, some abolitionists, and really this would be a great opportunity for a savvy politician to show up on stage and really galvanize support, bring together these different elements of the party into a cohesive and solid and potent voting force coming up on 1864. But instead, Abraham Lincoln writes a letter, and he instructs James C. Conkling to read this letter slowly to the audience. And we will see that in this letter, Abraham Lincoln convinces his audience that he has not entertained peace proposals from the South, and he justifies the Emancipation Proclamation as a necessary and constitutionally protected war measure. He also defends the Emancipation Proclamation's provisions to arm African Americans to fight in the Civil War. And the way he convinces his audience of those 3 points in particular is he uses the 2 rhetorical devices that we discussed earlier, prolepsis and using common vernacular. So let's dive in here. As Lincoln talks about the future progress of the war, he's saying, look, we really have 3 options. We can give up the Union, which is something that Lincoln is never in favor of. He's saying, look, if you're trying to crush the rebellion by force of arms, hey, I'm for it. Let's do it. And he begins with the first example of prolepsis here. Now, as Alan Guelzo notes, Lincoln uses prolepsis a lot, going all the way back to his Lyceum address. And he uses it very, very effectively because it almost strikes up a conversation in the reader's mind. And here we see Lincoln saying, okay, if you're for crushing the war, okay, great. If you are going to try to stop the war and leave the Union divided, I'm not in favor of that. He's saying, all right, that leaves us with a third option, which is compromise. And Lincoln goes on to explain why compromise just isn't possible. And you see it here in this underlined section, that Lincoln says, okay, if you really think that compromise is a great idea, you need to keep in mind that military success or failure is what allows compromise to work. And until the Army of Northern Virginia, and really the Confederate armies as a whole, are stopped, there's nothing that can be done because compromise, it won't be upheld by the Southern side. And you see Lincoln say that right here when he says, but no paper compromise to which the controllers of Lee's army are not agreed can at all affect the army. He even calls compromise a waste of time. So here we see Lincoln using prolepsis to say, look, for those of you who are in favor of compromise, it's really not possible. And then we see the first real development of those 3 argument points we discussed earlier, highlighted in blue here, where Lincoln says, look, I know we just discussed the compromise issue, but I have not heard any peace proposals coming from the South, and any charges or insinuations to the contrary are deceptive and groundless. So we see there, Lincoln transitions from prolepsis to making his argument right here, as we see in blue, that he has not gotten any or received any peace proposals. So now we get to the first real example of vernacular, where Lincoln says, but to be plain, you are dissatisfied with me about the Negro. This is a very clear reference to the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln then explains, okay, his own personal view is that all men could be free, and he's saying, all right, I guess there's people in the audience who do not. So then Lincoln offers up a short history lesson on how he got to the Emancipation Proclamation. This wasn't some rash decision, some knee-jerk reaction to war conditions. He said, look, I suggested compensated emancipation, as you see here. And he said, okay, you wish not to be taxed to buy Negroes, all right. And then he's saying, okay. He also tried colonization to kind of read beyond the text. He tried gradual emancipation, nothing worked. And now we get to the second point in terms of the argument points we discussed earlier. He's saying the Constitution invests its commander-in-chief with the law of war in a time of war. So he's saying here that my Emancipation Proclamation is constitutional, as you see here with I Think Differently. And he's saying that because the slaves are property, thanks to the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision, that his Emancipation Proclamation is a necessary war measure to deprive the South of their labor force and their military support force, and that is a necessary war aim. So in this one section right here, we have blue, which corresponds to Lincoln's argument, but we also have prolepsis, because he starts off a short conversation with prolepsis, sort of anticipating what the audience is going to say. Has there ever been any question that by the law of war, property, both of enemies and friends, may be taken when needed? So he's asking the listener to consider, okay, if we're fighting a war, aren't you supposed to take away your enemy's property so that way, or even destroy it, as you see here, to keep it out of the hands of the enemy? So he's saying, look, in this war that we're fighting now, so the Civil War qualifies as a war, and the Constitution grants me with the power to take away that property. So now we see him in this next paragraph here using the common everyday vernacular. He's saying this war has certainly progressed as favorably to us since the issues of the proclamation as before. And Lincoln, much like a common everyday person would do, he talks about the opinions of others. Just like a common person would go to their friends or a different source that they know of to get information about the progress of the war. And he's saying, look, the Emancipation Proclamation, it's worked. In fact, it's really, and when you combine the Emancipation Proclamation, how it's arming colored troops, it's dealing the heaviest blow yet to the rebellion. So Lincoln's saying, look, for all of you who have not been convinced yet, know that the Emancipation Proclamation, it's effective. And as a little party plug here, he's talking about even people who have never had any affinity with abolitionism or the Republican Party, just a pure military opinion, they recognize that the Emancipation Proclamation is effective. Another interesting point here comes in the next paragraph when he says, you say that you will not fight to free Negroes. Some of them seem to be willing to fight for you, but no matter. So he's sort of anticipating someone saying, well, I don't like having Negroes fight in the North for the Civil War. He's saying, well, look, you need to address the fact that they are willing to fight for you. And he's saying, notice here, this is where we see another nexus between his argument and the use of prolepsis. He's saying, we are fighting to save the Union. So here we see the emancipation as war measure to preserve the Union coming back. Again, we see more prolepsis here in this next paragraph where he's saying, do you think differently? I thought that whatever the Negroes can do as soldiers leaves just so much less for white soldiers to do in saving the Union. Again, he's driving that point home that arming black soldiers is a necessary war measure. And then he's saying, well, if they are willing to do all this for us, if we do, we have to do something for them. So therefore, he's saying, look, we have to grant them their freedom. And to continue with the war being, beneficially impacted by the Emancipation Proclamation, he says, look, the signs look better. The Father of Waters again goes unvexed to the sea. That's a reference to the Mississippi River. So he's using sort of colloquial, common language to, sort of make the audience feel comfortable and like, oh, okay, great. They recognize what Lincoln's talking about. And it's sort of a poetic way to say that the Mississippi River is now in Northern hands completely. Here he talks about, the different military success, all as a manifestation of arming black soldiers. And then here we see another famous example of Lincoln using the vernacular, nor must Uncle Sam's webbed feet be forgotten. Uncle Sam being a reference to the Northern War effort, and webbed feet being a reference to the success of sort of the Navy and sort of beginning amphibious operations on the Mississippi River and along the Atlantic coast. When a cabinet member asked Lincoln about, hey, is the audience going to understand what you're talking about? Lincoln said, hey, I know the people. I understand what they have a capacity to get, and I think this line is going to fit in this letter. So Lincoln kept it in the draft, and sure enough, Americans reacted very favorably to this letter. So here we see Lincoln saying, look, the war is going well because of the Emancipation Proclamation, and we need to be thankful for all branches of the military as they have been waging an effective war. He says, peace does not appear so distant as it once did. Now note, peace only isn't distant because of the success of black soldiers at Milliken's Bend, at Fort Wagner, and Port Hudson. So, hey, we're arming black soldiers, and it's going well. And then he has this very poetic line, which is, sort of common vernacular, and his thesis statement as well. Hey, there will be some black men who can remember that with silent tongue and clenched teeth and steely eye and well-poised bayonet that they have helped make mankind to this great consummation. So here, this very poetic language, very reverent language for the black soldiers that he's